you have to listen to the consumer, but you've got to understand their lives and what they're doing and how their day plays out, and find those moments that really matter where your brand can have a very relevant moment.
Welcome to a new season of the CIM Marketing Podcast. In the new series, we're moving away from algorithms and AI to explore one of the most sought after, yet misunderstood attributes in business: creativity. There's a massive intersection where marketing, AI and creativity overlap, and we're not going to ignore the elephant in the room. Instead, we want to focus on one of the innately human characteristics that can't be replicated by GPTs. Creativity is the soul of our profession. It provides the crucial counterbalance to the more data-heavy and analytical aspects of the job. It is the art, not the science. Thankfully, it is also what seems to attract rebels and rule breakers into the profession. Those individuals who can't stand to do things in the way they've always been done. Those who live and breathe innovation. We know it's a struggle for marketers to find the time and space to be creative. It's a discipline that requires practice. Yet all too often, businesses treat it like a commodity, something that can be turned off and on at will. But, as we'll see over the course of the season, the reality is far more nuanced. Over the next 6 episodes, we'll tackle the tension at the heart of our industry. We'll explore what creativity looks like in the context of modern business, examine why it's often one of the first things to be squeezed out, and ask why it's now more vital than ever before. With expert insights from the minds behind world-class campaigns to advice from some of the biggest and best marketers around, we'll provide you with the tools you need to take a step back, carve out space for creativity, and get inspired for the year ahead. If you're ready to reclaim your competitive advantage, then stay tuned. This is the season of the original thinker. Hello everybody and welcome to the first CIM podcast of the year. Today we're Emily Heath and Paul Greenwood. Emily, can you give us a little introduction to yourself?
Yep, so I'm Emily, or Em as most people call me. I'm Global Brand Director on Rexona, which is best known as Shaw in the UK. My role is in charge of what does the brand stand for, show up as, how it's positioned, what's its strategy, as well as looking after all our sports partnerships, media, PR, social media, and then also our community impact programs.
And I'm Paul Greenwood. I head up the research and insights team at We Are Social, and we have 3 functions. One is proving the value of our work through data and effectiveness, social intelligence, so understanding what's happening on social media, what makes people tick, and cultural insights, so understanding the cultural spaces that a brand can show up in.
Well, you know, last season, during the autumn, we spent a lot of time talking about computers, AI, technology, things that are going to change our world, the machines that are going to change the way we live and work and act as marketers. This winter, we're going to flip that round. We're going to be talking about human beings, human creativity. Is it getting lost? Is everything becoming homogenized by the march of the machines? Well, I think we're about to find out. Paul, you've got a few insights. You've produced a report which looks into some of this stuff.
Yeah, we did. So it's called the Global Digital Report, and it was launched in October 2025. And it looks at a huge amount of data across the world, 200 different markets. And it's looking at everything in terms of social, mobile, e-commerce, and just how people use the internet in an interesting way. I guess there were like 3 big stats that really stood out for us. The first was there's now 5.5 billion people on social media, and there's over 6 billion profiles. So that's like 75% of the world's population and now on social media. What's interesting about that is that actually the time spent on social, though, is plateauing. So it's hovering around the 2 hours, 25 mark per day. But we're seeing that it's slowly reducing over time.
It's reducing?
Yeah, it is. And I think the FT put something out recently that said the same thing. And it's not a bad thing. I guess it's just people have now probably reached the peak that they had when they were using the internet, when they were using social during COVID. And obviously people are getting back to the real world, the real lives. And so that is slowly declining. But the number of platforms that people are on stays consistently the same, just under 7. So what we're seeing is that while the number of people using social is going up, time's going down. And I guess they're still spending the same amount of time across different platforms. So it's getting harder for brands to reach them and to communicate with them.
We've reached peak social then, have we?
We've reached, potentially peak social time spent on social, yes. There's things like TikTok that continues to grow, and the time spent on TikTok is wild. I think on average, the average person around the world spends 2 working weeks per month on TikTok. So that continues to like really dominate that. But we're also seeing different platforms come up. So the things like, I guess, like Discord or Substacks, while not technically social media platforms, there's still spaces where people spend a lot of time, and maybe that's where we're seeing people move to beyond the typical large social media platforms like Meta and TikTok and YouTube.
You know, I like a surprise, and you've immediately surprised me with that statistic that social's plateaued and is actually coming down a bit. I can think of lots of parents who would welcome that with open arms. It's maybe not quite as good for marketers, Emily. But has it surprised you as well?
Well, I actually was trying to work out in my head how many social media platforms I'm on when you said it was 7 was the average. And I think I might be at that, if not over. It doesn't surprise me, to be honest, because I think it's actually quite hard for marketers when it comes to all the channels that are available to us this day to activate through. It can sometimes be so vast and so wide that you don't actually know where to start and stop, and it's really hard to therefore really impact on any one channel because you're trying to spread yourself quite thin over multiple. So actually the idea that there could be a sense of slowing down or plateauing is probably an advantage for brands, because it means that you can therefore invest in the ones that are going to be the most successful, or invest in the ones where more audiences are spending more of their time.
Well, it sounds like that's TikTok from Paul's testimony.
Yeah, and we spend a huge amount of money on TikTok, and we're really beginning to grow our brand presence on TikTok. I'm not going to lie, I find TikTok quite overwhelming as a user. Like I open it and I almost feel like I'm overwhelmed by a flood of content versus more your metas, which feels a little bit more controllable. But that's where the younger generations are going. That's where they're finding their entertainment, and so therefore it's so important that we react to that. And there are even though things are going to plateau, I think there will still be new channels popping up to really just see the appetite of the users and where they're going to go. So I welcome it, because I think it will allow us to really focus in a bit more. I don't think it means that the opportunity of social goes. I just think it means that you can be more focused in.
It's interesting findings. There's a shift there. You know, the fact that social overall is coming down a bit in usage, that actually TikTok is so popular, people spend 2 working weeks.
2 working weeks. So it's about
2 working weeks per calendar month.
Yeah, it's about 40 hours. Yes.
That's a lot.
Yes, it's crazy.
I don't think I have enough hours in the day to be able to do that.
Yeah.
That didn't cross my mind. Where do people find this time? But anyway, we'll move on. Have you noticed any shifts in this context of how consumers are engaging with brands through their obsessive use of TikTok or something else?
Yeah, definitely. I think brands need to be discovered more. Marketing and advertising of yesteryear was very much brand out. You know, you're very able to sort of push out your brand story onto the consumer. They received it through kind of big broadcast scale channels, and they kind of just accepted it and bought into it. Now it's really about showing up in their world, and their world, to be honest, is social media. So therefore you have to be discovered as part of that world, and almost represent the world that they want to be associated with, or that they believe they aspire to, or they are. So it's really important, and it's actually really hard, because you have to act a little bit chameleon as a brand, because you're trying to be who you are as a brand, but you're also trying to connect and relate with so many different communities and cultures around the world that it can be quite hard. It's very tricky.
What do you need to do then, for both of you really, but what do you need to do then to make sure you get that cut through, given the changes, and what do you need to do in terms of your campaigns to make sure that they're not just showing, they're actually bringing in revenue for your company?
You've got to listen a lot more than you ever have before. As I say, it was so brand out that it was almost, you didn't really care what the consumer or shopper was saying. You just had your own vision as a brand and you're pushing it out there. But now you've got to go very deep into communities, and small communities, not just like massive communities, and understand what motivates them, what triggers them, what makes you stand out to them. And then you kind of take that and build it upwards, and kind of, sort of use that to amplify something. But you've really got to start listening. Like we always say as kind of consumer good brands that were consumer centric. No, it's never been more important that the consumer is literally the epicenter of everything you do. So like, you know, you used to have that nice little triangle, which was like employee, employer, customer, and they were meant to all be equal. I actually think now it's not equal. That customer consumer part is so fundamentally key. It has to be at the heart of everything you're doing.
Thinking personally about how have you changed your approach? And you're aware of the context shifts, you're aware of the changes in consumer behaviour, but when you actually get in on a Monday morning and look to what you're doing that week, what has changed in the way you approach and your team approaches a marketing activity?
It's just a lot. I don't want to say it's harder, but it's a lot more meticulous, and you've got to be very much in the detail. When we used to create campaigns in the past, you would have your TV, you might have a radio ad, you'd have a single page print, a double page print, maybe a banner to put on social, on like digital. Now, it never starts and ends. Like, you know, a project, a campaign, you feel like it never finishes because there's just so many channels or opportunities you have to meet. Therefore, your creative, your craft has to be so much more detailed and finessed and thought through, and to be able to continue to engage with people constantly. You know, it's a 24/7 world when it comes to advertising. People are getting new advertising messages every second, and within that second, they're probably getting hundreds. So it's really hard. That doesn't mean it's something that means that it's impossible and you should shy away from it. It's just hard. You've got to embrace it. You've got to be very hands-on. You've got to really learn and understand how your brand can show up in this new world. The brand I work on, Rexona, which is called Sure in the UK, it's a legacy brand. It's about 120 years old.
Is it really 120 years?
Yeah, 1902 it was first created and bought by Unilever in 1908. So it's a really old. And it's been able to stand the test of time. But that actually is quite hard. Like brands that are those legacy brands are trying to show up in a very new world than they were created in. And whereas these new brands that are popping up like every day, they're created in today's world with today's consumers in mind, with social media in mind, almost created on social media. And you still got to compete with that. And it's actually really hard. You know, big companies like Unilever, you don't know what's going to happen with them in the future because, to be honest, these new brands show up in someone's garage. Yeah. And with sort of real, an individual person in mind when they're creating that product versus mass.
It's a great example. I think people love this. It's a really good example because people start up in the garage. They're born into the new context. Yeah. You know, they know they're born into a world where social media and high internet activity and smartphones exist. Sure wasn't. It was born when most people didn't even have a car.
Exactly.
100 odd years ago. And yet you've got to push that creativity and innovation to keep it relevant and fresh.
Stay relevant. And you know, sometimes people think we're not relevant. Sometimes they're like, no, you are part of the 20th century. Are you really in the 21st? And you don't want to reinvent yourself so much that you no longer are who you started out as, but you've got to be able to evolve with the consumer, with the channels, with the times, and create that nice balance of you still are rooted in your history and where you started from and what you essentially intended from the beginning, but in a way that means something to people today. Yeah. And it's hard.
It is. And when you talk about craft, and even though your craft has to be like spot on, when it comes to something like TikTok, your craft could be quite lo-fi, but just what we talk about when we think about brands in particular, and we look at their cultural relevance, and we know that if content can be culturally relevant, it's 6 times more effective at building brand. And when a new brand comes to us, we look at it in terms of whether it's high cultural relevance or low, and its customer journey, is it short or long? And like something like a Ferrari, like it's highly culturally relevant, it's an automotive, long purchase cycle. So when you're thinking about how you can be culturally relevant for them, it's like, how do you push into the emergent spaces in automotive? And how can you find the new thing that will hook that community or that fandom onto? Where someone like Rexona, which might be short purchase cycle, maybe not that culturally relevant. I don't mean to be rude, but then it's like, so it's then how do you borrow that cultural relevance from somewhere else? How do you create meaning, like you were saying? So how do you maybe tackle taboos in the category? How do you create something that's interesting for you? And I think brands like yours are really interesting places to work in and work with, because it's finding something new and exciting and trying to tap into adjacent cultures or adjacent fandoms that you can then push your message to.
It is deodorant. I mean, it's probably not really changed that much in 100 years. I mean, they've probably.
I won't bore you with the details.
I'm sure the chemical,
it works a lot better than it did.
the ingredients in it may have changed,
Yeah.
but the concept is basically the same. The product is basically trying to do the same job. And yet you have to find some sort of cultural insight along the way in order to hook a campaign too. I mean, how do you do it? How do you give us an example of how you've done that?
Well, firstly, I would love to almost be a Ferrari and be a brand that is culture. I think every brand aspires to that. But yes, we have to be tapping into cultural relevance and using culture that converts. Do you know what? I don't want to go back to that idea of you have to listen to the consumer, but you've got to understand their lives and what they're doing and how their day plays out, and find those moments that really matter where your brand can have a very relevant moment. Sometimes that is very much in how the product is functioning. So it might be very sweat, odor led ability to enter into a conversation. Or a brand like ours has been using a strap line for about 70 years, which is "it won't let you down." It's our "just do it" or "I'm loving it." And we have the ability to inject ourselves into conversations with that line. In some countries in the world where we're very, our penetration is huge, like Argentina, Brazil, the line "it won't let you down" is actually part of cultural vernacular because we're such an established brand there. So actually it allows us to play really nicely into just daily lingo, like, "oh, I need to Google it." In the UK, we are a very big brand. We've been around for like 80, 90 years, but it's not as ingrained into the daily language as it is, say, there. But it is very much about trying to understand how you can naturally just inject yourself into their day. And when you've got the likes of TikTok exploding and trends popping up left, right and centre, some are macro, some are micro, you have to be very restrained to not go after every single one of those trends that are popping up and thinking, "oh, how could I do my version of this to inject myself into this moment?" By the time you've injected yourself there, the moment's passed, no one really cares, and honestly, it was a piece of bad content. So therefore, you've got to be very focused in on what you stand for, how you can genuinely come into people's world in a way that is both relevant to your product, but also relevant to what you stand for as a brand.
There's a danger that you try to jump on every passing bandwagon.
Yeah,
Paul.
no, and that is true. And that's one of the hardest things you were talking about the guardrails that you need to have around a brand of what can you react to, but more importantly, what shouldn't you react to and why? And that's a lot of the work that we do up front in terms of the strategy and going, this is what we stand for on social, this is how we want to show up, but this is what is not for us. And a lot of that is done with smart thinking up front when you start working with a brand, but then it has to be kind of followed through on the day-to-day when you're creating that content, or when you're listening into those conversations, when you're carrying out cultural trackers to understand where you want to show up. The do's and don'ts are really important. Like Shaw's are really, like when I talk about cultural relevance, it's like you already start talking about sports, which is highly culturally relevant. Like it's a daily ritual. You will put deodorant on presumably every morning, I hope, or when you're going to go out to like a bar or a club when you're young. So there's lots of really interesting spaces where Shaw can definitely show up, and it's just like, when do I show up in those moments and why? But sometimes it's harder when you're we work with a music brand and they're very culturally relevant because everyone listens to music, but it's like there's so many opportunities that they could be jumping on. It's like holding them back is the hardest thing to do. It's like, it's not talking about that, it's talking about this. And how we try and get around that is, if we're talking about music and Taylor Swift has just launched a new album, everyone knows that. There's no point in us having a point of view on that. But Taylor Swift's childhood sweetheart talking about how she's the one that he lost when she released that album, that's the kind of story we might want to talk about. So it's, how do we go 3 levels deep when it comes to cultural interesting spaces and conversations that are happening online?
In the brand agency world, do you think this sort of collaborative creative process is common, or do you think that it is still too much of the bandwagon jumping? Or do you think there's still too much of the bandwagon jumping?
So I think brands in particular, and the people who work with certain brands, are becoming more, are realizing that if you just chase every trend, it's the lowest common denominator. It's not going to work. So I think people are pulling back. and trying to be more selective in how they jump onto a conversation that's happening and not have any kind of meaning or point of view on that. I work on 2 big brands. One of them is that music brand, one of them is a travel brand. And what I like working with those brands is that we're kind of empowered to like, this is something that we know could be working for you. And we can jump on that trend and talk about it. The 2 brands I work with are very, very data centric in terms of they measure everything within an inch of its life. So if that works, we come back to it at the end of the month and go, that worked, and that helps kind of prove why we should do it. If something hasn't worked, it's not there to be used to beat us over the head. It's like, oh, why didn't that work? Should we do that again? And sometimes it's like, no, so we stop that. Or how can we improve?
At the outset, though, does a lot of human instinct come into it?
A lot of human instinct comes into it.
You can't always prove what you're going to do is going to work, can you?
I think, interestingly, human instinct does come into it, but the longer you've been doing that and the longer you've been working in social, the better your instinct is. Yeah. So there is some kind of formula underneath it. And on the music brand I work on, there's a big photo, a big image on the wall, which is like, this is how we create content. And there's a 7-step process of it needs to contain this, this, and this. And if it has all 7 of those criteria, then we're good to go. And that's a good piece of content. Now, some of that might fly, some of it might not. But the good thing is like, if it doesn't work, it's like, how do we improve it? How do we optimize it? And our clients are really good in going, if it's not worked, just stop that. And they make decisions relatively quickly, which is a nice way to work.
You've got good clients.
I'm lucky with my clients.
How common are clients, in your opinion, Emily, who allow experimentation like that?
Oh, it's tricky. Everyone's got those pressures of needing to be able to prove the data, to prove the success. And, you know, I think we all want to be risk adverse and take experiments, but at the end of the day, people are very focused on need to be able to prove the numbers. I do think we need to all be better at taking those risks to really understand where those permissions lie and, you know, where the consumer might positively react positive to something that may have been a mistake. But you do see these scenarios where brands have really been bold and put out some quite, you know, strong creative, and there has been quite a backlash. And then you've got to recover from that as a brand. And so there has been a bit of a hesitance. I do think we need to use our own human instinct a lot more. Right. You know, I work on a daily commodity. It's a deodorant brand at the end of the day. And I do try and sometimes put my own view on things of, would I care about this piece of content if I didn't work on this brand? And I do think sometimes you've got to be that realistic with things, because at the end of the day, if you don't care about it and you are working on that brand, then no one else is going to probably care about it. And it's really easy to almost get caught up in the moment, spend all this time and effort and money on a piece of content that probably is going to do nothing. It's
interesting, isn't it, this idea, this sort of tension, if you like, between innovation and risk-taking versus tried and tested. And, you know, you went around, didn't come on the shows last season, but last season we were talking, as I said at the top of the show, about AI and how machines can help us as marketers, and how machines can help us as marketers. And there are many, many ways in which AI can help us. But one of the flaws that I think last season uncovered was that there does lead to a degree of homogenization if you rely on it too much. Because what it's effectively doing is saying, this has worked in the past, let's do this. And at some point, it needs a human in the loop, doesn't it, Paul, to say, yeah, well, we've done that. We've done that to death. Yeah. We're going to try this. And you know what? I can't prove it immediately. Yeah. I may be able to prove it in the future. But you've got to give it a go. Yeah, it's like system 1, system 2, to be honest. You need to look at AI as the system 2, and the system 1 is you as a human just being able to make a better judgment with all of the information that's presented to you. And that's why I wasn't part of the conversations you guys had last year on your podcast, but AI is a brilliant tool. It's there to help us get to solutions probably faster, to create more options. But at the end of the day, when it comes to marketing and advertising, people are making decisions based off an irrational way of thinking. Yep. So therefore, you need an irrational mind to help kind of push it over the line. So I think AI is brilliant. I think AI makes us a lot better at our jobs, makes us faster at our jobs. But at the end of the day, you must have that human touch, that human magic to make it really connect with people. The argument is it can be too rational, and actually our irrationality is our strength. Paul.
So it's a spark of creativity is our rationality, yeah. So Like the travel brand I work for, they don't act as a travel brand on social. They act as an entertainment brand. Social media is an entertainment space. They want to be entertaining. So, and we got to that because they're an online travel agent, and you look at all the competitors, they have the same inventory, the same prices, the same destinations. There's nothing cutting them apart. And when you looked at the social content, it was all the same beautiful, wanderlust kind of content. And so we just took a really kind of native first, chronically online approach where we do silly things, and there's a payoff with the brand in the background, and there's always a push down the funnel to like you can check it out here, do this, but it's worked really, really well from them because we looked at what all their competitors were doing, like let's just do the opposite or do something completely different. So that you need to have a human instinct to be able to do that creativity. What I find interesting around creativity in AI, and it's what happened with Disney and Sora. Did you see the news late last year where Disney have given, I don't know exactly, but it feels like they've given their IP over to Sora, which is OpenAI's video AI generator. So what I can imagine is all of Disney's characters are going to show up in Sora and hand over that creativity to the consumer to create their own videos. So that means that creativity is changing from being in the hands of agencies and in the hands of brands, and they're putting it into the hands of consumers much higher up and giving them an opportunity to remix that content, to create what they want and use their imaginations to create a really interesting space, I guess. And it must be quite terrifying for a brand to give up all that control. And brands have done that in the past. I remember a few years ago, McDonald's allowed people to play around with its logo, which is like iconic, and no one does that, but it generated a lot of conversation. So I'm really interested to see where this Disney partnership with Sora is going to go, because they've basically changed the way that creativity can happen with their IP, which I find fascinating.
What's the benefit for the brand of doing that?
Well, people would take your content anyway. People would take, I don't know, Lion King and create their own content, create their own memes. Whereas here, you're basically giving some control to the brand, because I presume you'll be able to use it on the brand account. And there'll be some restrictions around what you can do with that IP, whether it's Aladdin or Jasmine or any other Disney like IP, and allow people to create short form videos with it, and which might go viral and fly. So you're basically making every single consumer or any person who's on AI and that platform your marketer.
It's also taking their brand to an audience in a different way. You know, it's stretching the realms of what it means to be a Disney entertainer. Yeah. I think it's quite genius in a way, because they're really reacting to what's happening naturally out there, and as opposed to resisting it or, I don't know, flying out lawsuits left, right and centre, they're like, let's be a part of this. But there's probably still an element of their being able to have some control in that. So I think it's really interesting.
I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall in the board meeting when this was getting approved at Disney headquarters, because we talk about risk taking, we talk about innovation. I mean, it's both of those things. It probably will work, because effectively you're getting consumers to produce free advertising.
But I think Disney's always been on the front foot of trends. Yeah. You know, they invested into Pixar before sort of digital animations were becoming anything people were really even considering. I feel like they've always had that foresight to how they need to be at the ahead of the game, as opposed to trying to chase from behind. So I think it's very in keeping with who they are as a company. It's
a great example of a company striding into a new space and boldly doing so. Do you think there's any other areas which are underexploited, which marketers can think, well, hang on a second, we could try this?
So, and just a bit of a data point on AI, there's a billion users per month on AI, different AI products, which is huge when you think about it. But in terms of maybe not as innovative and as bold, but I think the one thing that I'm seeing partly as a resistance to AI is when it comes to marketing, that people are trying to signal humanness and human-led stories, and they're trying to move away from AI aesthetics. And a really easy and obvious way to do that is, and you see it all, especially with premium brands and prestige brands, is like this. They often like lean heavily into nature. So there's like lots of natural aesthetics coming out. It signals provenance and heritage, and and I think what we'll see as a reaction to the AI content coming out, and it's estimated that 97% of content online will be AI informed or generated in some way this year. I think you'll see a pushback, and people want to see more human-led stories, real people, deep emotion, and longer form content as a result of that. There's some really interesting, not brands, but like creators like Mug of Life in the UK, where people sit down, have a cup of tea, and they just talk about someone that they miss. You know, like someone, like a nice memory. It's nostalgic, it's deeply emotional. You see it on like Subway Takes in the US or A View from the Bridge. It's this like very deep human stories, and and has a strong emotional pull. And I think that's where brands might start to lean into to showcase that their content is not AI generated. It's something different.
When you were given that anecdote, the first word that popped into my head was human.
Yeah.
It is essentially human. It's not something a computer can generate, and it can be very powerful for marketing, Emily.
Yeah, definitely, and you can't replace real human stories with AI stories. They just don't connect as meaningfully with people. And I think, AI had a bit of a bad rep last year. I think there was a lot of worries that Terminator was going to come to life, and people therefore become quite protective. They go, they pull back, they feel threatened, and so they almost become more aware of who they are as an individual and their sense of humanity, and almost become protective of that. So AI is there and it has a very clear role, but we need to allow human instincts, human stories, human needs to really shine through. And when we use AI in our communications, the final product you see on the screen is never going to be AI. But it may have helped us create initial storyboards, or it may have helped us create something that just went into testing, because it allows us to get there a lot faster. But it's not the end product. The end product truly is human, from human insights, that has just had the speeded up process in the middle to just allow us to go to market so much faster.
Yeah.
But it's so important as brands to reflect humanity and to reflect the communities and the consumers you serve. And you can only do that if you are reflecting humans.
And so I work in research, and so we were talking about cultural relevance and understanding cultural spaces and new cultural spaces. What it's really good at is synthesizing data. So I have one of the analysts or directors carry out a large piece of cultural insight work, and then we have lots of different, it's a big exploratory piece of work with lots of different kind of data sets. If you can upload that into AI tools and have like different gems that are set up to carry out certain methodologies within cultural insights. So like an RDE, which is residual, dominant and emergent, a kind of analysis of like expressions of, love or, hatred. It will be able to map that out for you very, very quickly. And it's not perfect, but I had a director do that piece of work, and I had the AI do that piece of work, and I reckon it was about 60-70% correct. So it helps you shortcut a lot of that deep thinking as well.
Yeah, when we're looking at research reports, you might be looking at multiple at any one time, hundreds of slides long. Yeah. It will help you almost look to them all, compare, contrast, and come to some conclusions that you've obviously then got to put a human lens over to be like, are these conclusions really in keeping with what the business challenges are, what the local context is, who we are as a brand? But it will just help you get there so much faster. And
I think that's the main thing, is having an expert who actually understands what an RDE looks like, and like analysis looks like, to go, actually, that is actually correct. Mm-hmm. So you need experts, whether it's within research or strategy or creative, who can prompt the AI to do what you want it to do, because you know what good looks like because of experience.
It's interesting. I'm working on a piece for a professor at the moment, who's saying that actually this Terminator analogy, everyone, that was last year's thing, the Terminator, that actually this stuff is going to be a tool, and it'll end up being a very mundane tool like electricity, which is very clever and almost magical, but people just expect to exist in the background. And that's what it'll end up being. It'll be the new electricity. Nobody really knows how electricity works, do they? But it just happens. It's just there. These lights are on. It'll be the same sort of thing, and the human on top will be still the key player. Let's move on to marketers' favourite topic: measurement. Mm-hmm. We all love a bit of measurement, don't we? I'm going to start with you, Emily. When you look back at a major brand campaign where creativity's been you thought the creativity was good, the creative process was good, the campaign has landed. What are the metrics that you use to measure its success now, and how do they differ from the metrics you would have looked at in the past?
I wouldn't actually say the metrics themselves are changing. So the main metrics we'll look at at Unilever, you've got your hard and soft. Your hard are very much, how much are we selling? What's the value? How much volume is shifting? Are we gaining market share? Is our margins improving? Those sorts of things. The soft is really like, where's that brand power coming from? So we look at brand power across multiple metrics, meaningful difference and saliency. And no matter really what's happening in terms of how social media is evolving or AI is evolving, as those are still pretty much the three most important metrics we look at to really fundamentally understand how our brand is showing up with all the other brands in the world. We've been measuring that for decades, and it is still very much at the forefront of our mind. Now, there are other metrics that go along with that. So we'll be, like Unilever has something called UBS, and it has multiple metrics like feeding into it that look at what are called the 6P, so pack, price, product, promotion, place. I always forget one of them when you're going through them all, but you've got so many data sources feeding into those different 6Ps that then help us really understand what are those levers we need to be pushing and pulling in any given quarter of the year to ensure that we are kind of staying ahead or reacting to local business challenges. But when it comes to those campaigns, specifically the advertising side of things, it really is going to be that meaningful and difference in the saliency, because saliency is very much that mental and physical like availability. Like, are people seeing us, remembering us, and we're like literally in a shop that they can go and buy. When it comes to the meaningful difference, it's really like, are we giving them something that is adding value and meaning to their world, like it's a product they need, and are we different? Are we standing out from everyone else? And that can come down to, is the product itself different, or the way we are communicating and engaging with people different? So the channels might be shifting, the amount of channels might be growing, the need to constantly be pushing out content and act like entertainers, like your brand is, like we very much say, act native to the channel, is changing, but actually what we're trying to achieve isn't. It's very important that those metrics kind of stick throughout.
What about you, Paul? When you're in a social first of culturally driven campaign, is it reach and engagement? Is it changes in behaviour you're looking for?
So it's all of those things. So you were talking about like short and fast metrics, or like, so short metrics are like how we show up in social, is it working? So view through rate, people eyes on the content, are people engaging with it, are people sharing with it? And then we go deeper in terms of what's the impact on brand. And so that would be brand studies that we carry out. Are we basically control and test kind of like, is it changing any kind of aspect of what we want people to do? The other thing that we have here when it comes to like cultural relevance is we've created something called the hype score, which allows it's made up of 3 different metrics similar to your salience, meaningfulness and differentiation. It's around visibility, cultural salience and actually action. And we can measure, and that's made up of many different metrics from social and beyond and earned and paid and influencer. And we can kind of give ourselves a score based on ourselves of, are we growing these things? And if not, we use it as a diagnostic metric to go, actually, we're not getting that much visibility. Why is that? And so then we can go in and go, how can we get better? But in terms of changing behavior, I think one of the best examples, and this is probably the best example and best proof of like the campaigns worked, is we worked with Adidas and we did a campaign when Paul Pogba moved to Manchester United yonks ago. Yep. And it was a transfer season. We had a bit of content with him and Stormzy. Stormzy's a massive Man United fan, and he's also a massive Pogba fan, and Pogba was a fan of Stormzy. And it was just a spice up of those two dancing to one of their songs. And when he transferred over to Manchester United, we released it, it like blew up. And everyone's like, that's a really good piece of content. And then nothing happened, and obviously it happened internally, we like celebrated and shared results. But the next transfer season, every other football club tried to replicate that. And so that was when we knew that we had a really good piece of success, because we changed sporting culture, because every other football club in the UK was trying to replicate what we did. So it's a bit like flattery, but like something had shifted, and we think it was that piece of content.
Imitation is still the most sincere form of flattery. Do you think there are measurements that the industry still over relies on, Emily?
Yeah, I do. I think, if we go back to talking about the experimental side of things, because of this, the measurements that are put on brands, local markets to perform, it means that experimentation doesn't really happen. And it's because you're trying to prove that every piece of content is beneficial. I think when it comes to, say, social media specifically, we talk about engagement rates quite loosely, and actually an engagement rate isn't necessarily a real sign of if something, it might be performing well on social media, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's performing well in terms of converting people.
Yeah.
And sometimes when it comes to measurement, it's hard to connect all the dots and to really prove that this piece of content has the capability to drive someone fundamentally into a shop to buy.
Mm-hmm.
And when you work in a company like mine, that's fundamentally what everyone wants to understand. You know, that every piece of content should have the ability to sell you a product. And, you know, that is really hard in today's world to be able to prove that every single piece of content has that ability. So we can sometimes get ourselves lost in measurement and not really just allow ourselves to create, experiment, learn, test, and because you're so kind of constrained by all these different measurements.
Well, engagement is vanity, conversions are sanity.
Conversions are sanity, yeah. Engagement, I would say that not every single piece of content should be able to convert. I think there's different types of content and you take them all as an aggregate. And if you have a proper, I try and think of it as we need to capture their attention somewhere. So this is how we do that. We then need to have a follow-on message and we hit them again and again, where we slowly bring them down in the funnel and go, actually, now do you want to convert in some way? And so it is around social, working with the performance team to make sure that journey's tight and correct. We do a lot of conversion lift studies on some of the accounts that we work with, and we can prove that we've driven incremental sales for quite large incremental sales on the content that we're putting out there as a whole for the year. We wouldn't go, that one piece of content needs to do this, and this.
I think it's because marketing or advertising, it's just not linear these days.
You
know, you don't have, we kind of stop creating consumer journeys now, because at the end of the day it's very hard to take Bob from step 1 to step 10, and therefore you have to have in your head that they might just see that one piece of content from you, they might not see the other 10 pieces. So if you are assuming that you've got this piece of content that has this job, and then this piece of content that does that job, and then this one that will ultimately convert you, they may only see number 1 or number 2 and not number 3. And the problem is, if they only see number 1 and number 2, that might not mean that they go into the shop and buy you, which is why there's quite a lot of pressure on us almost that every piece of content should have the ability to drive that sale. Because, unfortunately in today's world, when they're being bombarded with messages by the second, like they say that every consumer now should be treated like a goldfish, because they're receiving so many advertising seconds, like every 8 seconds or something, that you've got to assume
they're spending 2 weeks a month on TikTok.
Exactly. So therefore you have to assume that they're not going to see A, B, C. So therefore A, B and C all need to have the ability to do the same thing, which is, it's hard, especially in TikTok, where people are fundamentally there to be entertained. They're not there in a way to be sold to. And so therefore, when you're trying to entertain them, you've got to have this balance of entertain them. Oh, but buy deodorant. And that's quite tricky, because that's not what they're wanting. They're wanting entertainment, want to go down that rabbit hole that they never come back up for 2 weeks of the month. So that's where measurement can sometimes stifle creativity, because you've got to have this, it must sell, it must sell, it must sell.
Yeah. What are the big mistakes, do you think, Paul, when people are trying to get that cut through, as marketers?
So I think the big mistakes that they might have is, I think you were talking about this earlier, where it was around trying to react to every single moment. I don't think you need to. You need to know who you are as a brand, what you stand for, and what's that value exchange, and be quite explicit with that value exchange when you're talking to your consumers. Like, this is what we can do for you. And I think don't try and push that message too hard. Like, the one thing that, especially on social, I'm thinking of this from a social perspective, and you've just said that in terms of people are on social primarily to be entertained. So how the brand shows up can be quite ambient. It can be around you, not explicitly in your face, but also make sure that it's memorable. You were talking about mental availability and just making that memory structure. I think if you can do that regularly, that works. Whereas if you think you're just going to have a one-hit wonder, hit them with some content and then suddenly they convert, it's going to be difficult.
I remember being in a production bidding process, and this social director was talking to us, and was saying like how she would like to bring our brand to life through social. And one of the things she said that stuck with me most was brands need to stop thinking they're influencers and acting like influencers on social media. You're not an influencer, you are a brand. Yeah. So stop pretending to be an influencer. She's like, it's like going to a party as an 18-year-old's party as a 50-year-old and pretending that you're going to fit in. You don't. You've got to remember that you are coming into their world and you need to work out how you can be relevant and engage in their world, but you are not that world, if that makes sense. So you're not the influencer.
That's an interesting example of, I mean, I don't get invited to my son's parties. He's 16. Yeah. Good job, really. But that's an interesting example of a bit of insensitive, sort of local insensitivity, thinking you're something you're not as a brand. Yeah. You're a global brand. What about global insensitivity? That is often a pitfall we hear in creative, that people just get, they work for the culture they're from rather than the culture that they're going to.
Yeah, and we get that a lot. I'm the global team based in the UK, and you have to really force yourself to take yourself away from being a UK and to really imagine how the brand exists, show up and brings meaning into people's lives around the world. And surprisingly enough, a deodorant is very different around the world. Like there are many cultures in the East where deodorant isn't part of the daily habit. Sweating is not an issue. They don't care. Whereas you go more west and it's very established. Like most people are using it once, twice, even 3 times a day in countries like Brazil. And it's very hard when you are a global marketeer to pull yourself out of your own experience and your own existence. And also global brands as well, you know. As I've said, when there are so many new brands showing up in people's garages, they're being created in that garage for that country, for that community, for that culture, as opposed to with that big global mass mindset. So it is hard. You've really got to have this view of who you are really as a global brand. And there are going to be things that are going to be consistent in every country you are. Your logo, your name, your strap line, the types of products you're selling. But you then have to have the ability to really react and respond to how your product needs to show up for those local people. So yeah, if you were to go to different countries around the world, actually we've got 5 different brand names, which is just something to juggle, but you might see a slightly different view of what Rexona is in Brazil versus the UK versus the US, because we have to adapt to what is meaningful to those people there.
Pieces of advice would you give to the audience, Paul and actually Emily, to make sure they create great creative marketing that's innovative, that's willing to take a bit of risk, that cuts through and doesn't fall down any of these pitfalls?
The pitfalls are there. I think the quick answer to that is you should always have your common brand guidelines at a global level. This is how we behave, this is how we show up. But then you should always be creating content in the local markets to ensure that you have that local nuance, that cultural context, that you're not making insensitive comments or content. And so we're a firm believer of having cultural trackers and newsrooms in every single market to make sure that we can show up in the right way. I think for a brand to be, we were talking about experimenting, and I think social's a great place to experiment. Yeah, there's a lot of eyeballs on social, but the great thing about social is that you can just take it down. You can't take a billboard down overnight. Yeah. And I know that's a bit of a flippant thing, but like some people get really caught up on social, but what I found really interesting when Gucci launched on TikTok, they were really playful. They were doing some really unusual, interesting stuff, which a brand would not do. The brand would never do on like out of home. They were working with Francis Bourgeois, the train spotting guy, doing really strange and odd things. Same with Marc Jacobs. So I think social is a place where you can experiment and try some stuff out. And if you're not comfortable doing that on your own brand channels, think about what creators could do as well and influencers, and working with those types of individuals to push a different message, test something new, be bold, and if it works and it sticks and you get the results, you can then start transforming that into your own content, and then into other marketing spaces as well.
It's also the channel where you can post things like organically. You don't have to necessarily put paid media behind it. You can therefore see how it performs, how it reacts. Do I want to put any media behind it? Whereas other channels are more rigid. You've got to invest in them up front, and if it doesn't stick, it doesn't stick. Doing anything to our physical products is also a massively risky area. Once it's on the shelf, it's on the shelf. If you put anything on there that gets challenged legally, you lose all that stock if you lose the challenge. So I agree, social really is a bit of a playground. If you want to experiment, it's the place to be able to do it because it has lesser risks associated with it. Slightly on the flip coin of that, if something suddenly picks up noise negatively, also positively, it can spread like wildfire, and that can be something you've got to be able to get a control of quite fast.
But it's interesting that your underlying sentiment is that don't fear social as this sort of tinderbox dry place that can catch fire, because that's a good thing about it as well as a bad thing about it. But actually accept it as a place of experimentation, and remember that it's not like you spent millions on a billboard that you can't then remove.
So I'd say embrace it. Get creative, have a bit of fun, because at the end of the day, we want to have fun in our jobs, and that's the place you can be having it.
Creativity, innovation, risk-taking. Is Terminator behind us now? Is it 2026, the year that humans are back in charge?
Yeah, I don't ever think they weren't in charge. Personally, this is my point of view.
Some people did.
Some people did.
Yeah.
I think there was just a sense of unease. It's something new. People don't like change. It's change. And it's just, you've got to adapt and control that change in a way. So I don't feel like we ever lost control. I never felt in 2025 like AI was in charge of my job.
The year of the human marketer, Paul?
Yeah, I think it's the year of the human marketer harnessing AI and expanding on the best parts of themselves to produce better creative as well. So I think it's the year that people stop fearing AI and go, actually, we can use this to actually make some great content, some great campaigns, and really like make an impact.
Paul Greenwood, Emily Heath, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.